Hey everyone, my name is Daniel Young, and this is my literature critique of the association of television viewing in childhood with overweight and obesity throughout the life course. For a little background on this paper, the context of the study was secondary screen-based behaviors are popular among children and may continue through adolescence and adulthood. These longer screen time hours have been previously shown to be associated with adverse health outcomes like obesity. And the study objectives were for the examiners to see whether or not a relationship between daily television hours in childhood and risk of overweight obesity across the life course existed. The primary exposure was television hours, but they also looked into a relationship with overweight and obesity that included physical activity. The primary outcome was overweight or obesity, and this data was collected via self-reported questionnaires. So this study was an ambidirectional cohort design with independent sources reporting both the exposure and outcome. The ambidirectional cohort comes from the fact that there were actually two cohort studies used for the study population. The first was the Nurses Study 2, which is also called NHS2, and the Nurses Mothers cohort. So in the NHS2, they used a prospective cohort of over 100,000 female nurses across the U.S., and this was established in 1989. These nurses were predominantly non-Hispanic white and aged 25 to 42 years old. The Nurses Mothers cohort, on the other hand, was a retrospective cohort and comprised of mothers of the nurses in the NHS 1 and 2 studies who reported data on themselves, the biological father, and the early life exposures of their daughters. There were a total of almost 40,000 questionnaires returned with this information, and 35,349 of those were mothers in the NHS2 study. So they used those mothers' questionnaires that were then linked to the NHS2 information to form the ambidirectional cohort. Daughters who were adopted or whose adoption status was unknown and who were missing exposure or outcome data were excluded from the analysis. The final sample totaled to be 30,921 mother-daughter dyads. So for the data analysis, kind of bear with me. I know it's a lot of words, but this was fairly extensive and it's kind of the meat and potatoes of the paper. For the measures of association, they basically ran three large analyses. The Spearman correlations were calculated between television viewing time and physical activity level at ages 3 to 5 years and in adulthood. Logistic regression models were also used, and they were used to estimate the association between hours spent watching television daily at ages 3 to 5 years and the odds ratios and 95% confidence intervals for overweight or obesity at ages 5, 10, and 18 years and in adulthood. They also went on to run two sensitivity analyses, and these were looking at the extent of association between TV viewing time at ages 3 to 5 and adult overweight or obesity accounted for by adult TV viewing time. And then the other one was the extent of association between TV viewing time at ages 3 to 5 years again and adult obesity, with adjustments for overweight and or obesity at age 5 years. And then for the measures of statistical stability, they included p-values and 95% confidence interval when necessary. So the results section in this paper was also pretty extensive. It was littered with lots of tables and data analysis, but I feel like the main conclusions they were wanting to get at were the ones listed here. Watching television at least 4 hours daily at ages 3 to 5 and 5 to 10 was related to 25 to 61% higher odds of overweight or obesity throughout life after adjustment for the parental and daughter covariates. High daily television viewing time paired with that low physical activity during childhood was also associated with 82 to 441% higher odds of overweight or obesity across the life course. This was important, I felt like, for a quick little plug for public health, as both of those are modifiable risk factors that public health policy could intervene on. And then the last one was something that I felt like was a positive. Half an hour of television viewing per day at ages 5 to 10 years was associated with reduced odds of overweight or obesity at age 18 years and in adulthood. So for this paper, I considered a few potential biases, the first of which was a recall bias. And this was due to the fact that mothers were asked to recall certain exposures decades after they occurred, and they approximated this to be around 32 to 52 years later. The other one that I considered was the non-differential misclassification bias, and they actually listed this in their paper as well. And they stated that any misclassification is non-differential and thus likely biased towards the null. And I agreed with their take on this. And then there's also the selection bias, which was definitely a concern. This was a super homogeneous population of predominantly white females, so this bias is completely reasonable to suspect. As far as confounding variables go, this paper did a great job on controlling for those. They age adjusted everything as appropriate to me, and they also included other covariates that they controlled for, including maternal education, maternal pregnancy BMI, and paternal BMI, maternal gestational weight gain, smoking history, activity during pregnancy, home ownership, daughter's birth weight, gestational age, birth year, and breastfeeding duration, as well as many others. So overall, for confounding variables, they did an excellent job. Some of the limitations, though, go hand in hand with the biases. The external validity, I think, is completely reasonable to suspect with the homogeneous population. And then with that, the only female population, another limitation could be, does this hold true for males? They were completely excluded from this study, so I think that's reasonable to state. And in the paper themselves, they stated that they had limited diet information, and when asked for the maternal figures to recall certain dietary events, the correlation with that was extremely poor. So to wrap up this paper, the author's main thoughts seem to really come back to that they concluded that television viewing at least 4 hours a day in childhood may be associated with higher odds of overweight or obesity throughout life, and that the association was definitely magnified when paired with low physical activity levels. I also think that this is a reasonable conclusion when looking at the possible limitations. It would be impossible to use their study population and guarantee that the obesity rates in television hours were definitely correlated. However, using this study to come to the conclusion that there might be an association is a very accurate statement in my opinion. And then the generalizability of the study. People may have different opinions on this, but I think the wording of their conclusion could be applicable to any population. I found it reasonable, again, to indicate a possible association. And I do think they have a strong enough study to make that statement based purely on the study population size alone. Of course, a more diverse study in combination with this would be more beneficial in the future to confirm the association, but for now, I found that it was reasonable to state what they did. And then potential directions, as I've noted previously, that a lot of these were controllable risk factors, and having public health hop in and be proactive with physical activity and television hours in young age groups could be super beneficial. And then I guess a potential direction of further research is now that phones are way more popular nowadays, is seeing whether or not we have the same correlation with phone time as we did with television time.